Occupying Till He Comes at Southwest Prophecy Ministries.
Today, Dr. David Snitker concludes a two-part interview featuring filmmaker James Jaeger talking about the explosive new DVD from Matrix Entertainment, Midnight Ride, when rogue politicians call for martial law, that you won't find in the Obama government-friendly media. The presentation features Chuck Baldwin, Edwin Vieira Jr., Pat Buchanan, and other well-known personalities. Let's join Dr. Snitker and James Jaeger.
It is a real honor and privilege to have James Jaeger back on the broadcast today to discuss his latest film, Midnight Ride, When Rogue Politicians Call for Martial Law. James is the president of Matrix Entertainment, a patriotic organization dedicated to making films to educate the American public regarding the Constitution. On our program last week, we were talking about the Boston Marathon bombing and the gigantic martial law drill that occurred as a consequence of that event. As we ran out of time last week, James, you had brought up another exercise, perhaps martial law exercise, called Jade Helm 15. Tell us some more about that.
Yes. Hi, Dave. What worries me most about the term Jade Helm 15 is not Jade Helm, it's the 15. We've got this drill going on. Is there going to be a Jade Helm 16 this year and 17? Are we going to have, martial law drills rolled out across the nation every summer? It's a little bit troubling. And Jade Helm 15 was basically a exercise in practice of martial law. I mean, I don't think there's any other words for it, across 7 states in the Southwest. And it almost seems like it was some kind of a follow-up on the Boston Marathon situation, which you, I think, very correctly pointed out, really looked like some kind of a training routine for a large martial law rollout.
Yes, in fact, a memo was found earlier in that week announcing that there would be a massive martial law drill on Friday. So this was not spontaneous by any means. To be able to marshal 10 to 15,000 police from all over, National Guard, etc., for this gigantic lockdown that took place in Watertown was definitely not a spontaneous event from my observation. There's another thing you mentioned in the film that strikes close to home. My son was in the Army Reserves for 12 years and often would do drills at Fort A.P. Hill in Virginia. It appears that they have constructed an interesting city for terrorism, for terrorist drills there at Fort A.P. Hill in Virginia.
Yes, the troubling thing is that this sanctuary for practicing terrorist drill doesn't look like these terrorist drills are being intended for foreign affairs. They have, United States post offices and bus stops, and it looks like an American town that they're practicing for some kind of domestic terrorism for. I mean, it really, when you add up all the factors, it really looks like they're basically preparing for some kind of a widespread civil unrest in the event of some kind of a catastrophe. And it doesn't look like that catastrophe is anything like, normal in the way of fires or hurricanes or that kind of thing. It looks like they're preparing for some kind of a civil unrest. We speculate in the film that it could be if the Federal Reserve System crashed. This would be a perfect excuse for them to roll out the police state and declare martial law. And of course, in the film, we go into the legal basis of what kinds of martial law are legal and what types of martial law are not legal. And there are 4 types of martial law, which your listeners, if they are interested in delving into the details of this, we go into them in great detail as to which forms of martial law are legal, and when I say legal, I mean constitutional, and which are absolutely just tyranny being expressed.
What are some other events that you foresee may serve as a catalyst for a call for martial law, sheltering in place, lockdowns, civil emergencies, that may be on the horizon for America?
Well, I don't know. We have this situation in these shootings. We have these school shootings constantly happening, and now we have this situation happening in Oregon. The Oath Keepers are not suggesting that it's a good idea for these people to go over there. I don't know. I mean, it could be anything. It seems to me that the shooting in Pasadena is almost backfiring because Americans are now actually uniting behind the idea that, come and get us because we have a gun behind every blade of grass. So this concept of decentralized protection is starting to become first and foremost in a lot of Americans' minds, and that, of course, is the concept of the militia. Rather than having some elite group of people with big guns, we have every American properly trained with their small gun. And the key word is trained, because that's what the Second Amendment envisions. A well-regulated militia is another word for training. You can't just have a bunch of weapons and be holed up in your basement and not have any idea how to use them or be properly trained. So the whole concept of the militia system, which we go over in great detail in both of these movies, is the idea that it's the training and the fact that the militia, a constitutional militia, is something that reports to the governor of a state. And let me emphasize that. A constitutional militia is not just a group of well-meaning citizens with guns. It's a group of well-meaning citizens that are responsible to the governor of their state. So the problem is we have to get these governors who have been totally taken over by these two political parties that run this country. Some would say one political party. We have to get these governors to comprehend what the militia system is about, and the citizens need to, the militia, a constitutional militia, needs to report to the governor. So, of course, they are trying to vilify the word militia. At the same time, they're trying to ignore the fact that the word militia is right in the Second Amendment. So it's creating some cognitive dissonance, probably with the pundits and the mainstream media.
Yes, one of the interesting features, I'm just reflecting on our president's recent visit to Paris to, save us from global warming. And he was there right after the San Bernardino shooting. And our tone-deaf president actually made the statement. He says, these kinds of things don't occur in other places. This was shortly after Islamic terrorists killed nearly 150 people in multiple locations in Paris, all of course, disarmed. Paris is a gigantic victim disarmament zone. And these defenseless people were mowed down by the dozens. And our president basically said this kind of thing, referring to San Bernardino, which was tragic but much less extensive, these kinds of things don't happen in other places. Any comments on that?
Well, again, to the degree these types of things start happening in the United States, there's hope that Americans will react with the concept that we need to be self-armed because the police show up 20 minutes after everything's happened. It's impossible to have police every single place in this country. That's an absolute totalitarian police state beyond imagination. So I think they're starting to back into the concept. At least the American people seem to be backing in, at least the American people on the right. I don't know how long it's going to take those on the left to comprehend this stuff, but, a good guy with a gun neutralizes a bad guy with a gun. If there's certain people in our population that are armed and carrying, then, and somebody comes into your rock concert and starts shooting, you've got some people there that can shoot back and neutralize this. I see no other way that these kids in the high schools and colleges can be protected than to put a gun in a lockbox, just like we put an axe in a fire extinguisher in a box, and give various teachers access to this in the event there's some kind of a rampage in that school. And, they go after putting us on lists, and the 80% of Americans are now, they're saying that they're behind this concept of, background checks. Well, as we discussed in Molon Labe, the founders wanted weapons and arms to be readily accessible by the citizenry. You're not supposed to register yourself because obviously you have to register yourself for a background check. The state knows who has all the guns. They just come and round them up like Nazi Germany.
Right.
So this whole concept of background checks is ridiculous. What they should do is they should make everybody that uses psychiatric drugs register. And then they can check to see who's on the psychiatric drugs, not, the law-abiding gun owners.
Right, absolutely. When you look at the mass shootings in our country in the last 15 years, whether it be Columbine or Sandy Hook, all of these individuals were on these psychiatric drugs, antidepressant drugs, and that factors into just about all of these mass shootings. But yet,
my father, if I could interject this before we moved too far from the subject, my late father was a psychiatrist, and my grandfather was a neurosurgeon. So we're connected with the medical industry very highly. And when my dad was doing his residency, we lived at the Norristown State Hospital in Pennsylvania, and this hospital had thousands of inmates. But and this is before Thorazine came out. Then Thorazine came out. I'll never forget the day my dad walked up to me and said, holding a capsule, he said, "This is a miracle drug." And shortly after that, the state, in order to save money, started emptying out the Norristown State Hospital and various other hospitals that he worked for. He was a government psychiatrist. And basically they put thousands and thousands of mentally ill people, many of them in the Violent Male building, which my father was in charge of, out on the streets and put them on these drugs, these psychiatric drugs. Now, it's high time that we realize that psychiatric drugs are just not a substitute for incarceration and medical care in various institutions. I'm not saying everybody should be incarcerated, but as soon as they start putting everyone out on the street instead of taking care of them in these institutions, we start getting these mass shootings. And there are statistics that show that every single mass shooting has somebody involved in psychiatric drugs, and a lot of times it's coming off of the drugs that's the problem. Coming off the drugs, going on the drugs, moments of instability. When they're on the drugs, they're oftentimes okay. But what we really need to do is we need to be registering people that are on psychiatric drugs. But the big pharma lobby does not allow the names or the companies to ever be revealed. And it's high time that we have a list of the names of the companies that are the drugs, exact drugs, and the manufacturer of these drugs, or who is using these drugs when these kids get on these drugs and they go in and start shooting up people. But right now the networks protect that because the number one advertisers of the networks, there's pharmaceutical companies.
Right.
So these people are massively irresponsible in never mentioning anything about the duplicity between the networks advertising, the profit of the pharmaceutical companies, and the fact that it's really the drugs that are causing the deaths. Guns don't kill, people kill.
Right.
Psycho people that are mentally ill kill.
Right. This concept of gun violence doesn't even make sense from a linguistic point of view. Guns do not commit violence. People commit violence. The question is, why do they commit violence? And as you say, psychiatric drugs is involved in almost every mass shooting in America. Well, we are talking today with James Jaeger, president of Matrix Entertainment and director of the brand new film Midnight Ride, When Rogue Politicians Call for Martial Law. Well, your film calls for a serious reexamination of the role of the militia in maintaining a free state. So let's drill down a little bit on that, James. Where does the term militia occur in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights? It occurs more than one place. And share with our listeners what the framers intended when they spoke of the militia and its role in maintaining a free state.
Okay, there are 4 places in the Constitution where keeping and bearing arms and the militia are referred to. The Second Amendment is the most popular. That's the Second Amendment of the Bill of Rights. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 15, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 16, and Article 2, Clause 2, Section 1 are the 3 militia clauses in the Constitution to stipulate the purpose for the militia. Now, basically, the first 11 words of the Second Amendment, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The 2 or 3, I'd say the 3 major words in there are the word militia itself. You've got the word necessary. This is the only place in the Constitution where it says something is necessary. It doesn't say that Congress is necessary. It doesn't say the president is necessary. It doesn't say the Army or Navy are necessary. It says a well-regulated militia is necessary. So here's a big pink elephant in the room that everybody ignores when they talk endlessly about the Second Amendment all over network television. They never look at the word a well-regulated militia being necessary to what kind of a state? A free state, not a police state. So we basically go into this in great detail in these films. Dr. Vieira's book, upon which the films are based, the first one, Sword and Sovereignty, and the second one, by necessity out of the tyranny by necessity, go into the militia. These two books basically give the details. The films are a primer on the militia system and the Second Amendment. So all in all, there's 4 places in the Constitution that deal with this.
Well, since this is so prominent in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, it perhaps would surprise us. Here we are 200 plus years since the founding documents were approved and became the supreme law of the land. When did constitutional militias become supplanted in our country, and how did that happen?
Well, for the first 300 years before ratification of the Constitution, approximately the next 300 years, for 600 years, American colonists simply knew what a militia was. That's why the terminology in the Second Amendment is almost matter of fact. A well-regulated militia being necessary to security of free state is almost a recital. It's almost like saying, we human beings need water and air to live. It's like, duh, everybody knows that. Everybody knows that the militia is necessary. So the founders didn't feel necessary to go into great detail on what they meant. Everybody knew because everybody was in the militia. So the militia was a universal institution that all Americans served in to help create protection for the nation. Now, when we got through the Civil War, and as we moved on into the era of fiat currency and so on, I'd say roughly the last 100 years, we started getting segued out of the militia system. And to make it a twisted, long story short, basically what happened is this. Everybody in the United States, in all the states, was in the militia. And what they did was they split the militia into the organized militia and the unorganized militia. And they threw all the citizens into what we call the unorganized militia, where they are today doing nothing. Then the other people, the ones that were actually active duty and that were doing some kind of work in the military and police forces, they were put into what was called the organized militia. Then the next thing they did, and I believe it was under Title 10, is they made the organized militia an adjunct of the Navy. So, not the Navy, an adjunct of the Army. So what they in essence did was they federalized the state militia and put it under the control of the two powers that are supposed to guard the exterior of our country, the Army and the Navy. So now this basically fell into the hands of all the people in Washington, D.C. So what we have here is a classic power usurpation of federal power usurping the state's power. And so now the people that are supposed to be in the militia are sitting there in something called the unorganized militia doing nothing. When was the last time you were called in to train, Dave?
I don't think I've ever received that call. I've been ready.
I'm waiting for the call.
I've been ready and waiting, but I've never received a call.
Yeah, this is no call. And so they basically have stripped out the concept of decentralized self-defense, replacing it with the concept of centralized control and defense. They are trying to bring the police powers of the state under the control of the rogue politicians in D.C., and that's what it's all about. That's what putting together a global government is all about. It's taking away everybody's right to keep and bear arms so that they can protect themselves from a tyrannical government, and that's what they're doing.
The organized militia is known as the National Guard. My father.
I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that.
Yeah, the National
Guard.
Right.
They called it That's right. And they named it the National Guard and then made that an adjunct of the Army.
Right. So about 110 years ago, I think it was in 1903, that the National Guard was, quote, organized and the militia became unorganized. What our federal leadership did was substitute the constitutional militia with a standing army, which is what the National Guard is, a standing domestic army. They're often called in for humanitarian purposes after a disaster, etc., or when citizenry, gets out of control. They are performing the duties of the constitutional militia, but yet, in effect, are a standing army, which the founders deplored, that idea.
I might also add the police forces in all of our neighborhoods are also a standing army. They're worse. They are a standing mercenary army, because the genesis of the police forces, these men in blue, was that all citizens were in the militia and expected to serve. But some of the more wealthy citizens didn't want to serve, so they hired somebody to step in for them and serve in their place. And as this started increasing, more and more people stepped in and hired people to serve in the militia in their place. They eventually institutionalized that and had the taxpayer pay for that, and that's what became our police forces. Our police forces are not constitutional security agents. They're basically a standing army occupying every crevice of the country, and they're mercenary, which means they're paid to do a job, which is really no different than the Hessians or any other mercenary army. These people, I'm not trying to denigrate the police, because I do know they have a lot of value, but the fact of the matter is they're not a part of the constitutional principle. We, the people, are supposed to be the police.
Now, as we talk about the militia today, it seems that the concept of a militia, at least by the media, has been demonized in our country. I recall that Timothy McVeigh, who was convicted of involvement in the 1995 Oklahoma City Murrah building bombing, was accused of being involved in the militia movement. Also about that time, there was the Ruby Ridge incident where a couple militia people were killed by the federal government. And then we have, as you mentioned earlier, the recent occupation of a national park in Oregon was also attributed in our mainstream press to dangerous militia men. Why do you think the concept of the militia is so demonized by the mainstream press and our government?
The mainstream media, I like to refer them as, are basically have been taken over by what's called the Long March through the institutions. And the Long March through the institutions is a technology of the Frankfurt School, which is hell-bent on applying cultural Marxism to Western civilization, in particular America, to take over the values of this culture and replace them with communist Marxist values. And the Long March through the institutions means the march through the media, the literature, televisions, books, radio, and the clergy. And what they've done is they have basically captured the culture of this country. There are 6 multinational conglomerates, Comcast, Viacom, Disney, Time Warner, Sony, and 21st Century Fox, that own or monopolize 95 to 98% of all of the media that anyone hears or sees through 6 networks, CBS, ABC, NBC, MSNBC, CNN, and Fox News. And basically, these people want to get rid of guns, and they want to instill the 10 planks of communism. 7 of those 10 planks are already in place. So when you talk about the mainstream media, the people that are running the mainstream media, the control group, which our future film will focus on, are basically hell-bent on putting a Marxist agenda into Western culture. And to do that, they have to destroy the family unit. They have to destroy all kinds of moral values. They took Bible reading out of the schools. They're trying to push this concept of separation of church and state, when the founders had no intention of separating the church and the state and the church. The government's not supposed to overly respect any religion, not treat religions like a leper. So we've kicked religion out of the school system. Now the kids have no values. They're put on psychiatric drugs. Is it any wonder we live in a world like we live in today, Dave?
No, it's the law of sowing and reaping. And we have sown to the flesh, and we're reaping the corruption of that. And it is by design, is what you're saying. Well, our time's almost done. We're going to give one last question. And this is your opportunity, James, to really encourage our listeners to purchase the film. Why is it vital that people buy this film and share it with their friends?
Well, you're not going to see this film on CNN or the History Channel. That's just, given. And there's 230 million registered voters out there. 230 million voters should be concerned about the constitutional principles, and they should be concerned about the militia and the Second Amendment that make it possible for us to live in a free state. So if you enjoy living in a free state, if you appreciate and respect that this is a republic we live in, not a democracy, if you basically feel that the biblical principles that informed the founders are important, and you want to see how they were put into action by some extremely wise people 230 years ago, you might consider taking a look at Molon Labe and Midnight Ride.
Thank you, James. It's been great having you on the program today and last week as well.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Dave. It was a pleasure.
We've been speaking on the previous and current broadcasts with James Jaeger, president of Matrix Entertainment and director of the brand new film Midnight Ride, When Rogue Politicians Call for Martial Law. This is a nearly 2-hour film with an all-star lineup of patriots and constitutional scholars. We've only discussed a few of the issues covered in this film. I believe this could be the most important Liberty film in 2016. And now Jerry Giltner will share how you can obtain a copy of Midnight Ride, When Rogue Politicians Call for Martial Law.
Thanks, David, for the conclusion about James Jaeger's newest DVD, Midnight Ride. The 111-minute production can be yours by contacting Southwest Prophecy Ministries. A single copy is available for a gift of $25. Call 1-405-604-5975. The web address is SWPM.us, or write to Box 58043, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, 73157. This is a film that'll never appear in the mainstream media because those rogue politicians don't want you to see it. But thanks to Southwest Prophecy Ministries, you can get a copy of the compelling DVD Midnight Ride. Here are comments from experts like Chuck Baldwin, Edwin Vieira, Dr. G. Edward Griffin, and many others. Get the powerful presentation by calling or visiting our website. We'll send a single copy in appreciation of your contribution of $25. Call 1-405-604-5975. The web address is swpm.us. Our mail address, Box 580-243, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, 73157. Again, the phone number, 1-405-604-5975. Or log on to the internet at swpm.us. Midnight Ride is offered to help saints occupy until the Lord comes. Plan now to be with us next weekend for another stimulating presentation with Dr. David Schnitker, president of Southwest Prophecy Ministries.